never final when the Father's in the room. Ooh, lay your burdens down. Ooh, here in the Father's house, check your shame at the door, 'cause it ain't welcome anymore. Ooh, you're in the Father's house. Yeah. You're in the Father's house. Yeah. Prodigals come home, the helpless find hope. Love is on the move when the Father's in the room. Prison doors swing wide, the dead come to life. Love is on the move when the Father's in the room. Miracles take place, the cynical find faith, and love is breaking through when the Father's in the room. Jericho walls are quaking, strongholds now are shaking. Love is breaking through when the Father's in the room. Love is breaking through when the Father's in the room. Ooh, lay your burdens down. Ooh, here in the Father's house, check your shame at the door, 'cause it ain't welcome anymore. Ooh, you're in the Father's house. Yeah. Lay your burdens down. Ooh, here in the Father's house, check your shame at the door. Welcome anymore. Ooh, you're in the Father's house. I won't forget the wonder of how you brought deliverance, the exodus of my heart. 'Cause you found me, you freed me, held back the waters for my release. Oh Yahweh, sing this with me. You're the God who fights for me, Lord of every victory. Hallelujah, hallelujah. You have torn apart the sea, you have led me through the deep. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Cloud and hallelujah. You've torn apart, and you have torn apart the sea. You have led me through, and hallelujah, hallelujah. Come on, there's freedom in this house today. There's joy in this place. Yeah. Could you prophesy with me? You stepped in, 'cause you stepped into my Egypt. You took me by the hand, and you marched me out in freedom, straight into the promised land. Now I will not forget you, no. I'll sing of all you've done. Death is won forever by the fury. Let the music prophesy. Just lift up money, shout in this place. Praise the Father, praise the Son, Holy Spirit, three in one. Let us join your perfect love for one another. Praise him young, praise him old, every heart, every soul. Thank you, Jesus, for the life we have forever. 'cause you're the only reason that I'm even breathing. I am wide awake. My heart beats only for your glory. My hands reach up for you to hold me. My soul sings, Father, you are holy. My feet dance to rhythm. Every beat is calling. Every beat is calling out your name. You left the glory of your throne to bring this runaway back home. Only you can, only you can. You give me love, you give me life, you keep me dancing through the night. Only you can, only you can. My heart beats only for your glory.
All right, y'all. Hey, can we do this? Tyler didn't turn the reverb off. John, on the board, can you turn the reverb off so I don't sound like, what's the rapper that it's like, T-Pain, so I don't sound like T-Pain for the rest of the night? Or at least feel like I sound like T-Pain. How about you guys do this? I feel really far away, and we want to be able to cheat and use the monitors. Do you guys mind just kind of moving up here a little bit? I hate when people do this, but I'm going to make you guys do it because I have the microphone. So, conflict, yes. Don't tell people to move after they've sat down. Perfect. Y'all are awesome. If you want to sit on this side, you can too. Don't feel like you... They're more fun to look at, though, so that's okay. All right, y'all. Well, hey, welcome. We're excited that you guys are here. I think one of these three brilliant people said it one of the first or second week, just by being here, you've already started to work on your mental health, and then we're also going to work a little bit on conflict tonight. And so one of the phrases that's always stuck with me with conflict, because I saw a lot of conflict growing up, had a relationship with my parents that was filled with conflict. My parents' relationship was filled with a lot of nasty conflict. And so my idea of conflict was that it was a constant breaking or tearing apart. And so we all start somewhere with what we know about conflict, what we've experienced. Maybe we're in a conflict right now. And so one of the phrases that's kind of really changed the way I think about conflict is that conflict is a constant opportunity. And so that's a really good way, maybe a healthy way to think about conflict, that it's an opportunity for us not only to know how we feel, but to be able to, in a healthy way, discuss it with the person that we're in that conflict with, but also to begin to help them heal or restore a relationship a little bit. And so kind of what we want to get into this evening is conflict, because it's necessary. Paul says, talking about marriage, that if you're married, you will have conflict. If you've been married for more than 5 minutes, you know that you're going to have conflict. So we're going to talk about it. It's common. It happens. It definitely happens in the church. And so we want to talk about it with you guys tonight. I'm going to pray for us real quick, and then we'll get started, okay? Heavenly Father, I just thank you for this evening. Father, I thank you for a night to talk about conflict, to talk about something that is going to happen, and to talk about ways that we can do it in a healthy way, in a helpful way, to restore relationships between people, between ourselves and others. And so, Father, would you allow us to learn something this evening? Would you help us to grow in some way this evening? Father, would you remind us of your truth, that you don't want us to live in opposition to each other, that you don't want us to live with hurt feelings or undiscussed feelings, Father, but that you want us to be able to talk about those things in a healthy way, and often that causes conflict. And so would you just help us to be initiators? Would you help us to walk in a healthy way with you and with other people? And so, Father, would you just guide us in that this evening? Father, I thank you for the three that are sitting to my right. I thank you for their desire to know you, the desire to study your word, and also the desire to know and study people and how to help us when we have issues and things that are related to our mental health. And so, Father, I thank you for them. I thank you for the wisdom that you've given them. I just ask that you would be with us this evening. Father, we love you, and we thank you. In your name we pray. Amen. All right, y'all. Well, my name is Tyler Blackburn. I'm on staff here, and then I would love for you guys just to introduce yourselves, because I see some familiar faces, but I also see some new faces this evening.
I'm Christina Martin. I work at Prime Care.
I'm Stephanie Marlowe, and I'm in a private practice.
And I'm Zach Hall, and I am also in a private practice.
One thing that we're going to do a little bit differently, just flipping the script. Christina, can you throw up the slide with the QR code on it? So one thing that we've done, this is a way for you guys to ask questions. It's completely anonymous, so don't be afraid of asking a question that may be silly or you feel is silly. There are no silly questions. But if there's something that gets brought up tonight that you're like, hey, I would really like to ask a question about that, one thing you can do is you can pull out your phone right now. You can scan that QR code, and that will allow you to ask questions. Or if you don't have the ability to scan that QR code, you can go to slido.com. And you can type in mental health at the top of the screen, and that'll allow you to be able to participate in that discussion as well. So if you guys have questions, or you think is questions as they're talking, it's a great way to ask those questions, but also we'll have a Q&A session at the end. That being said, you ready? All right, let's get started.
Okay, so we're going to run through a couple of slides that just have a little bit of information about conflict, but we really want to get into questions because there's so many different directions conflict can go in marriage, with your children, at work, at church, with coworkers. I mean, like, conflict is everywhere. We saw a ton of it in the last election season. And so we want to really give space for y'all to take it where you want it to go. So we'll just run through a couple of these really quickly. Relationship conflict. I got to turn around because I can't read that far. Miscommunication is a big reason that relationship conflict happens. Just either hearing something different than what was said or saying something different than what you meant. And we'll get into that a little bit later, more in a more deep way. Strong emotions, stereotyping, making assumptions, and then repetitive negative behavior, and I would say patterns, negative patterns that can happen in a relationship. And then the next type, which we saw a lot of this, I think, through the pandemic, and that's data conflicts. So lack of information, misinformation, differing views on the relevance of data, and different interpretations of data. So, you know, when you get all your news from social media, and then you fight with somebody on social media when you don't know who to trust for information. But that's not just global, like, news stuff. That can also happen at work. You get an email with this protocol and you don't understand what it means. That can happen all across the board. So, or when you're not given the information that you need. The next conflict type is interest. Perceived or actual competition over interest, procedural interest, psychological interest. And so that's just when your interests are in conflict, when you have different value set, maybe would be a way to say that. And then the next type is structural conflict. Unequal authority, unequal control of resources, time constraints. You can see that one everywhere too, but the first thing that popped into my brain was at work. But that happens a lot in marriage as well. And then value conflict, different ways of life, ideology, worldview, spirituality, religion, different criteria for evaluating ideas. I think we saw a lot of that one more overtly over the last 2 years as well. Because we've gotten into a spot, and maybe one of the biggest impacts on conflict, y'all can speak into this. I think we've gotten into a spot where opinion's no longer opinion. People state their opinion as fact. And if you there's no space for disagreement on those opinions. There's like a belief system now that if you have a different opinion of me, you don't like me. And that's just false. And so I've seen like opinion and conflict start to take an absolute place. Would y'all agree with that? Okay, moving on. So to start up conflict, if you need to be in conflict with somebody, which let me just say, conflict is not bad. Kind of what Tyler said a while ago, conflict is an opportunity for growth. If your relationship doesn't have any conflict in it, it's not healthy because it's not growing. So conflict is not bad, but when it's done unhealthy, it can be very damaging and it can become bad, if you want to use that language. Conflict that's done well is one of the biggest things to produce intimacy in a relationship, when you're able to walk through conflict well. So, conflict's not bad, but how you start that conflict can set the tone for how it goes. So you can have a harsh setup where you start in a way that's not going to set you up for success, or you can have a soft startup. I'm not going to read through all these. Y'all can take a look at it too, but basically it boils down to a harsh startup is going to be some sort of you statement where you come out with blame. And a soft startup is going to be where you are owning your part, either owning a mistake you made, owning how you feel about something, and keeping to those like I statements. There's a really good video on blame that I wanted to show tonight, but it has a cuss word in it, so we didn't. But it's Brene Brown's video on blame. It's like 3 minutes long. So go home and YouTube Brene Brown blame, but be prepared for one cuss word. And she talks about blame being the discharge of discomfort and pain. Blame being, if we can find blame, either on somebody else or taking it ourselves, we feel like we're in control of a situation. And so a lot of times when something hard or bad happens, we jump to blame very quickly so that we feel like we have control over it. And if we start there, in that conflict, that's that harsh startup, it's not going to go well.
I think the thing about the I statement that is kind of funny is don't trick yourself into believing that starting with I feel is always an I statement, because you could say, I feel you are awful. I feel you suck. And that's not an I. So the I is really checking in with you and how you feel and what's going on within you versus because that's still a harsh startup.
Yeah, that's a good differentiation. I like it. And that happens a lot in marital therapy, actually. I'll say, own your part, use your I statement. I think you, blah, blah, blah. That was still, yeah. So in that, going to the next slide, part of that is admitting your role in the situation. And so, again, we're not going to list all of these. These are just some examples that can be going on with you already that may be part of why you are reacting the way that you are in conflict. I'll tell you a big one for me that I don't think about a lot is up there, I have need to be alone. I'm an introvert in an extroverted job. So I give of myself all day long, and then I go home and give of myself to my family. And if I don't be very intentional for taking time to recharge by myself, guess who gets the brunt of that? My sweet husband. I will pick a fight with him all the time, or I will hear things that he's not really saying. I'll hear it in a shaming way, and I'll think he meant something else, and it's genuinely because I haven't recharged, I haven't taken care of myself. And so sometimes admitting your role is not necessarily something that you've done wrong, like a mistake that you made in the conflict. Sometimes admitting your role is admitting places you're not taking care of yourself and you're depleted. Zach, you want to talk any about the...
I think that one thing that I've gotten to work with Reengage, which is a marriage ministry, and then Merge is a premarital ministry. And in both of those ministries, one of the consistent themes is continuing to redirect the focus back into your lane, as we call it, back onto your side of the street. And one of the examples that we give is staying in your circle. And so I remember this from back in like addiction class days and like doing like 12-step stuff where in the programs they tell you to take your fingers, put them together, and do this motion. Just like this. And now you've created an entire bubble, and everything within that bubble is within your control, and everything outside of that bubble is not in your control. And so you have to look at what is in and what can you do, this list of things up here, and what is outside of your control that you need to let go of, and the illusion that you could actually do something about this. I think I gave this metaphor on the first night that we did this, but I want to circle back to it, which is the imagery of the difference between a relationship being two people in a canoe versus two people in their own vessels, like two kayaks beside each other, paddling down a river of life. And if you are looking at the other one saying, why do you keep leaning? You're going to tip us because you're in a canoe. The difference would be to be in your own kayak and go, okay, what is happening in me? Am I leaning one way or the other? Am I unbalanced? Am I focused? And that can be in any one of these topics listed up there, and how you are not regulated, because at the end of the day, that's the only thing you've got any control over.
So one of the most useful tools that I've ever learned in all things is Cartman's triangle, or Cartman's drama triangle is what it's called. And this is useful in any relationship that you're in. Probably if you do conflict and you're like everybody else, you don't always do conflict well. And this is what happens when we're not doing conflict in a healthy way. So one triangle, the bold triangle, is the drama triangle, and which is the unhealthy way of doing it. And then the dotted line triangle is the healthy alternative, which we'll go over. So and it's real fun to do this in marital therapy because I will set up 3 chairs and make a couple act it out and make them run back and forth. And it gets exhausting, but it's to illustrate like conflict without resolution when we're just circling it or triangling it over and over again is exhausting.
You get your steps in.
You do get your steps in.
Like if you
and when
really
I was in
play
a
out.
challenge with Tim Chung not long ago, like, sorry, I had to go there, Tim. So places that we go in conflict. So there's victim, which is, if somebody says something and it hurts my feelings, it makes me feel weak, it hits my shame, whether they intended it or not. Their intention may not have been to hurt me, but if I felt it for whatever reason, because of that whole list of things that was on the slide before, I feel like that victim spot. Now, you may only feel the victim spot for a half second before you flip over into something else, but for just a second there, small, childlike, vulnerable, you go back to that place of weakness. And most of us don't like to feel that way. So what we do is run over to the persecutor spot, which I label as the angsty teenager, because angsty teenagers fight with everything just to fight because it's what they do. And so when we feel hurt and we feel small and we don't know how to fight back, because if we remember from talking about trauma, kids that experience trauma can't fight, flight, they do the freeze. We don't want to do the childlike freeze thing, so we're going to lash out and fight. We run over to persecutor, and we throw something back at the person we're in conflict with. And then they feel that victim spot for just a second, and then they don't like the way that feels, so they run over to persecutor, and they throw something back at us, and we go back and forth in that loop for a while until one of us or somebody else enters in as the rescuer. And I'll be honest, in church circles, rescuers often get praised. They're the pseudo-adult, is what I call them, because they're the ones that get to come in and feel like they solved the problem, but really all they did was eliminate the conflict. Resolution didn't happen, the tension went away. So conflict wasn't resolved, but the uncomfortable feelings that come with conflict went away and everybody feels a little bit better. So that could look like if father and son are fighting and mother comes in and makes it go away. That can look like 2 siblings fighting and parent comes in and makes it go away. That can look like a lot of different things. You can play this triangle out within yourself. If I'm feeling not good enough, man, I'm all alone again, I feel so awful, victim. Well, if I weren't such a screw up, maybe I would have more friends, and you start beating yourself up, and then you rescue yourself. I'll go drink something, I'll go eat some ice cream, I'll go whatever it is that makes you feel better, that takes away the pain. So we can play that triangle out within ourselves. We can also work that out with somebody that we're in a relationship with. The ultimate rescue in a marriage is divorce. So you didn't actually work it out in your marriage, you ended it. The ultimate rescue within yourself is suicide. You left. There's a lot of ways to rescue. What mine used to be in conflict was if I said whatever, I was done, I wasn't going any further. It didn't matter what you said to me or how much you tried to engage me. If I said the word whatever, you weren't going any further with me. It can look like going to work because you feel better there. It can look like a lot of different things. So we tend to play out kind of the crazy back and forth between victim and persecutor until something happens, an outside source or somebody in the conflict has had enough and they go to that rescue and it's over. But then whatever that situation was that didn't get resolved is still there to pick up next time. And even if it's a different topic next time, all of the energy and all of the angst that you didn't really deal with and tried to sweep under the rug comes back out and is involved in your next conflict. And so then the conflict's bigger. Y'all want to say anything there? Okay. So that's how not to do it. But that's honestly how most of us do it. And even me as a clinician trained in this and a marriage and family therapist that teaches other people how to do conflict, I catch myself in this all the time.
Sorry, I do have a thought.
Yeah.
that something that I've found over doing this over and over again and do it, like actually playing it out, is that rarely do people ever identify as the persecutor or rescuer. Like personally, everybody in the triangle feels like a victim, right? So, I mean, whatever, you got 100 situations you could play out, but everybody feels like I'm the one getting the short end of the stick here. And so everybody's fighting for that victim seat and seeing everyone else as the persecutor or the rescuer, or you're enabling that situation. That's the other word that I'll throw in, the rescuer, is rescuer/enabler. And the only reason I like that word is because the rescuer rescues who they see as the victim, okay? The persecutor is persecuting the victim. The enabler enables the persecutor, but they only do that because they see the persecutor as the victim. And so, like, a quick example would be adult son, alcoholic father, and a mother, right? So we've got, let's say the son's the victim, dad's the persecutor because he's yelling at the son, and mom rescues the son by saying, you need to back off, you've been drinking. Okay, so rescuing that situation. Now, if she sees dad as the victim, she goes to son and says, hey, he's had a really hard life. You don't know what his dad was like. Could you just take it easy on him? So she's actually enabling the persecutor, but doing so from a position of seeing him as the victim. And at the end of the day, you ask her how she feels stuck like a victim too. So I think the idea is that if you find yourself feeling like a victim, like I have no options, what else was I supposed to do? They made me do this. These phrases, you're probably finding yourself in the drama triangle.
Very good point, yeah. You want to say something? Okay. So yeah, this is hard to not fall into, and especially when you're first learning how to do conflict differently. And we'll talk in just a second about stepping out of the drama triangle and into the healthier one. You can step out into the healthier one, but if the person that you're in relationship doesn't, they're going to want you back in the drama triangle because that's how they win. And so they will say and do things to pull you back in, and you'll have an emotional reaction, and you're right there back into it, and that's okay. You step back out. And so, like, the story that I'm ashamed that I did, but I use it as an example because, like, I'm a clinician. I do this for a living. In my second year of marriage, my husband and I were having a fight, and I yelled, "Screw you," very loudly at him. And then had this moment of like, oh, I'm not supposed to do that. And he looked at me and went, mature. And I was like, I know. And so we took a break, right? And so, like, it is very easy to fall back into it because it's a broken world, it's a fallen world, all the things that we've talked about in the weeks before, shame, trauma, hurt, anxiety, depression, whatever, makes it really easy to take out our stuff on the people that we love the most and for them to do it to us. So, okay, the opposite triangle, to be able to come at conflict from a healthy perspective, you have to remember who you are. So if somebody says something that hurts you and you initially feel that small childlike thing, to be able to not act out of the small child of which you are not, but to step into who you really are, which is that responsibility piece. Who you are, an adult, or, you know, something true about who you are, like remembering I am not a child that's not safe. I'm not a child that's weak. I'm an adult that is in control of my body. And so from that place of who I really am and the truth in my heart, I will enter into this conflict. And from that place of who you really are, not the weak child, not the angry teenager, and not pseudo anything, or enabler, but really who you are, then you can take a step back and look at all of your options from a place of health. Hopefully, the person that you're in relationship with will do the same thing, but you can't guarantee that. And then from that place, y'all both move to the negotiation.
Well, I just want to say something about options real quick, is that one of the ways that you'll realize that you are in the victim stance is you'll believe that you don't have options. Like, what else was I supposed to do? You know, those phrases, they made me. And I think what happens is we don't want to admit that we have options because we don't like them. Like, I don't like my options. I don't want to choose that. That's not exact. That won't get me what I want. But you do always have options. I think, okay, as an adult, you always have options. There's going to be, and maybe someone will ask a question if we need to get into it about kids, because this is going to be, there's a slight nuance to this drama triangle when it comes to kids, because they aren't adults, they don't have the same ownership and responsibility that we have, so it gets kind of, The drama triangle is kind of hard to apply in that area, but we can talk about that. But if you are an adult, which it looks like we all in the room are, you always have options. You just might not like them.
Yes, but you have to consider all of them if you're going to come from a place of health. And so from there, you begin to negotiate through those options. And if we're talking about a marriage, a word a lot of people use is compromise. We had a professor in college that said he hated the word compromise, and I agree with him. The term that we use a lot is mutual submission. Now, in the church, submission's gotten a bad connotation, but when you're talking about mutual submission, mutually submitting to each other, meaning considering the other person's needs along with yours, not dismissing yours, but considering the other person's needs, and you're in relationship with somebody that is also considering yours, you're able to negotiate back and forth to find, hopefully, a solution that fits, and nobody loses because it's mutual submission. In compromise, there's this kind of feeling of somebody loses because somebody had to give up what they want. And
if you're in a marriage, if one person loses, you both lose. I mean, like that's how that kind of works. So if we compromise, you get the. Are you talking about Barty? Who said that?
Rackley.
Oh, Rackley, yeah. Barty, he said, I like his language. He hates compromise too, and he uses this language of collaborate, which I just thought is a fun word to think about. Collaborating together. The other word I've heard is co-create. Because when you get into like co-creation, what you're doing is it's these two teammates figuring out a problem together, and all of a sudden it's intimacy building, and we're a team. We're on the same team here.
When you remember that the goal is resolution and growth and taking care of each other and taking care of yourself, it takes on a different flavor. That's hard to remember. The goal of conflict is growth and is taking care of each other when you're feeling like the victim or you're stuck in that drama triangle. So that's a simple yet heavy concept. And so if you've got questions about it, please tap them in there or catch one of us after. But literally this thing plays itself out. I mean, did anybody watch the last presidential debates? I didn't actually. I watched clips of it later. We saw that play out all over. You watch it play out on social media, and the way to rescue yourself on social media is to click out. And so it's gotten to be the way that conflict happens everywhere. So anyway, that was an overview. Take it where you want it to go now.
All right, y'all. So we had an issue with that QR code. So if you wouldn't mind, pull your phone back out again and scan that QR code. Or like I said a minute ago, you can go to slido.com, mental health, and ask your questions. You also see some live polls on there, and so just another way to kind of participate, and also that we can get some more feedback from you guys. So there's 3 different polls on there that you can participate in. The first one that's live right now is how would you describe conflict in one word, but I'll make a couple of those live as we kind of go through, so you can respond, and then I'll tell them kind of what your answers are to those questions. So I'll give you a couple more seconds to start putting in your questions, and then we'll start answering those. So some of the words, single word responses, as they're typing questions to that word cloud poll. The main one was tension, when they think about conflict, and one word, fruitful, tiresome, fight, and stressful. Those are good words.
While we're waiting on some questions, I'll put you on the spot.
Thank you.
Stephanie has a really good way, I think, of languaging how to take that drama triangle to responsible triangle and then how to reintegrate it into a relationship. Because the way that I see the drama triangle is very, like, it's got levels of codependence in it maybe, and like reactivity. And the healthy triangle is a very self-focused triangle of like, I am responsible for me, I'm taking ownership for me, I'm getting in my bubble, I'm riding my kayak. And so you do that, and then she has these 3 words to fit in that I think that are pretty good about how do you take that individual regulated stance and then re-engage in the conflict again.
Want me to talk about it? Okay, thanks. I would say, first of all, if you look this up, if you Google this triangle, most of the time you're going to see the persecutor, rescuer, victim come up. But if you Google the healthy drama triangle or something, you're going to see a lot of options that pop up. And so one of the options is what they just discussed. The one I really like, and I actually have never seen y'all's, I've heard you talk about it, but I've not seen it, is if you flip-flop the triangle, the creator becomes the victim, or the victim becomes a creator, and then the rescuer becomes a coach, and then the persecutor becomes a challenger. So I like that because I can remember 3 C's. So a creator, if I'm stuck in a place of hopelessness, which is the victim spot, then I have to ask myself, okay, I have to first identify that this is what I'm feeling, this is where I am. And so that takes a lot of intentionality. Once I figure that out, then I say, okay, what are my options? Which kind of taps into yours a little bit. But because creator, if I become the creator and no longer the victim, then I'm creating whatever I want, right? I figure out what I want to happen. So I'm actually trying to figure out what are my options. And sometimes if we can't figure out what those options are, we may have to go to a friend. I'm always texting these guys. They're always texting me, hey, what about this? Like, I'm stuck on this thing. What do you think about this, right? So if you can't figure it out on your own, reach out and figure out an option. I take the rescuer, and it's the opposite is coach. And that is, if I come in and rescue Christina, that means I have a belief system that she can't do it. She cannot go pack her own backpack, or she cannot, write a paper. So I'm going to go in and rescue her because I believe she can't do that. But the healthy option is to become a coach. And that is, I believe you can do this. Do you need some help? Is there any way I can support you? How can I encourage you? Those are the questions you would be asking yourself to try to flip-flop that and come out of that space as a rescuer. I keep moving this. As the persecutor, the flip-flop of that is challenger, right? So if I'm persecuting one of these guys and I'm saying, oh my gosh, you're a horrible therapist, you suck, right? If I was, mean, we become persecutors in a lot of different ways. Obviously, sometimes it doesn't sound that clear-cut. But then if I wanted to flip that into a healthy place, I would become a challenger, and I would say, hey, Christina, I noticed that maybe you felt a little intimidated by that, or I noticed that maybe you felt something was going on. What is that? You're actually a better therapist than that, right? Or something like that, that you would just challenge somebody to do something a little different instead of blame them or be mean or yell or whatever, or criticize. I think criticize is probably one of the best words for that. So I like that because it takes it from a relationship perspective and flips it again. It helps you figure out what you're going to do in the relationship over here too, in a healthy way.
I've never heard that. I like that a lot. The challenger especially. We almost need 3 triangles. Anyway, I like that.
All right, y'all. So the QR code thing keeps getting another layer deeper. If you submitted a question originally, we lost your question. So I know I'm really just trying to tick somebody off so that we have a live action example of how to resolve conflict, okay? So if you submitted your question earlier, within not the last 2 or 3 minutes, we don't have it. And then the other note, if Tyler could remember everything, the other note is if you like a question that you see that's already been asked, you cannot vote it. So you can just hit that little like button, essentially, since we were all familiar with that. And that'll put that question a little bit higher on the list of questions for us to ask because we know that more people like it. So we're going to start with a truly easy question. 5 people have wanted to know the answer to this one. It says, can you ever truly resolve conflict when dealing with a narcissist? Go.
Leave. Leave. I don't think so.
Well, if what we're thinking about in this thing is that conflict is resolved when 2 individuals move out of the drama triangle into a responsible triangle, that's where conflict gets resolved, then by definition of the narcissist, they can't get out of that. Now, I just want to ask the question about what level of narcissism are we talking about in these type of things, because you don't just want to write somebody off in general, but if you're talking about clinically diagnosable narcissism that cannot see their own responsibility in a situation, there's no chance for resolution. There's only chance for acquiescing into the drama triangle. I mean, yeah, you guys can't. When I think, like, okay, so there's I'm trying to think of, like, I don't have the DSM memorized on their criteria, so you could look up that one if you wanted to. But when I think of narcissism, I think of Ken Adams is a guy who he's kind of my go-to guy when it comes to learning about narcissism. And he describes 4 layers of narcissism, or 4 levels of narcissism, where 4 is the highest level. And again, like in my opinion, he is the number 1 guy I would go to on narcissism and how to treat narcissism. And he himself, I've heard him say numerous times in a class, he'll say, "I will not work with a level 4 narcissist." What he means by that is somebody who has complete and utter inability to have self-reflection and empathy within them. Like, and he would say a level 1, 2, or 3 have the ability to see it in them. It's just getting further and further away from that the further you go. But he would say there is an extreme, and I don't know if you got, I remember one time him saying he's maybe only encountered 1 or 2 in his entire career, what he would call level 4, where it was like it is so far, there's no way that they're going to be able to see reflections back into themselves apart from what they want to see.
I would say like extreme, it doesn't even have to be extreme, but like self-focus, inability for empathy or awareness, and a lot of times like a lack of desire to develop empathy or self-awareness. Y'all have probably heard the term gaslighting, and so narcissists are really great at gaslighting, which is being able to turn things around on the person that they're in conflict with and make the other person feel like something's their fault, or they're the ones that are crazy, or there's something wrong with them. They do a lot of accusing of the things that they're guilty of, but really it boils down to an inability to connect, like that lack of empathy or self-awareness. And I would say even if they're not level 4, although I can't remember all his criteria for the different levels, but even somebody that would be a lower level that has 0 desire to learn how to do anything different, which that might be level, I don't know. Anyway, yeah, I don't know if that answered the question. Okay. Yeah, a lot of people will use it to talk about somebody that just did something selfish in a moment, and like that's not narcissism. It looks a lot like addiction sometimes. Addicts are very selfish when they're in their addiction and very self-focused, and they don't have an ability to empathize with the person that they're in a relationship with because their drug of choice, whatever that might be, whether it's an actual drug or it's work or it's pornography or whatever, has taken precedent up here. Really, what I see most in addiction these days is just a complete like avoidance of anything uncomfortable. And so if somebody is in complete avoidance of anything uncomfortable, that's going to lend itself to symptoms of narcissism, because they're going to avoid uncomfortability, so they're going to avoid working out conflict with you, if that makes sense. So addiction and narcissism look like they go hand in hand, and I would say probably somebody that's in addiction long enough probably crosses over into some narcissism, because it really boils down to self-focus in a bad way. So
I would also say, I know this is not about narcissism, this whole conversation, but narcissism is such a big topic. You got to be careful, because there's an overt narcissist and there's a covert narcissist. The overt narcissists are the ones that are like, like the jerks. You see it, big CEO companies or whatever, and they're just really out for their own selves. They are really the mean people, right? The covert narcissists, they're the harder ones to recognize, because they're usually in helping professions. And so it really gets weird and complicated. And so you have to be really mindful of them, but their underlying behaviors are the same thing. They're just they look very different. So those are sneaky. Those are hard to identify.
That's really good. Next question is, what is the proper response when you feel like you are in the middle of a conflict between your child and your spouse?
I would just like to start by differentiating between adult child and younger child. Is that okay? So which one would you want to go, younger child or adult child? Okay.
Both.
I say that because, let me jump to the adult child real quick, because when you go to an adult child on that, then basically it's what we're talking about in this conflict with. Like at some level, it's like they have to take the responsibility to stand in that responsible stance and look at their options, and you stepping away from that. And so it's kind of, but it's hard because you're coming from a place before they were an adult child. And so it's hard as a parent, I think, to transition that into letting them take responsibility versus when they are a lot younger of a child in conflict, they don't have options like we do. They're not able to navigate or negotiate those options and take ownership for themselves.
I would say with a young child, like, obviously part of what's most important for a child is to see their parents on the same page. But the same page doesn't always look like agreeing in the moment. Your child also needs to see you be able to disagree and work it out. And so if, I'm trying to think of an example, but if I'm watching conflict happen between my husband and my son, and I see my husband getting really worked up, and maybe I'm recognizing that he's in his stuff and he's not, to step in and technically in the moment rescue the situation because I could see it go into an unhealthy place, is okay in a non-demeaning way to my husband and in a respectful way to my husband, but a safe way for my kid. And vice versa, I would want him to do the same for me if I'm not recognizing in my stuff and maybe I'm overreacting to my kid in the moment. But the difference between rescuing and then just kind of like taking a break is you come back to it. And so being able to either work that out in front of your kid if you're good at that, or being able to go calm down and then you as parents talk about it later and then come back and talk about that process with your kid. Some of that has to do with the age of your kid, but some of that has to do with like how healthy you and your partner are and how willing your partner is to engage in those conversations with you. And I know that that's a continuum across all the board in all relationships and can vary in the same couple depending on what's going on. And so part of that is having awareness of where you're at in relationship with your spouse at the moment. Knowing the needs of your child. Are they an anxious child? And so is tension going to really freak them out? And if so, for a while, you might need to have that conflict away from them. There's just a lot of variables to that. I would say if you feel like damage is going to happen to the relationship or somebody's not safe in some way, be that emotional or whatever, I think it's okay to step in a respectful way. As long as there's knowledge that it's going to be come back to later. And that parents, that's part of being on the same page is that, whatever that word is in Genesis, Ezer, Kanita, what is it, Christina? Thank you, I can never say it. That's what we were created for, is to be able to do those things together. And that doesn't always look good, because it means growth, or it means helpmate in conflict, in tension. In what? Opposite, that's the word. I always say conflict, it's opposite. That's what it is seeing things differently. I'm going to see things differently than my husband is because I'm supposed to. I'm created differently. So I think it's okay to step in if you're doing it don't do it in a, you are screwing this up, get away from our kid. Like, don't do that, but I don't know. Is that?
No, I track with that. I think I would argue that's not being a rescuer. I would argue that is being responsible. You have stepped out of it. So if you are in the triangle, you see the spouse in this example. So spouse and child are in a disagreement that is escalating. I see him or her as the perpetrator and there is the victim, right? So I need to rescue. Now you're in the triangle. But a responsible stance steps back and goes, okay, I'm an adult right now, and it looks like, in my best guess, my spouse is acting like a child with my child. So as an adult, what are my options right now? What can I work through? Then the negotiator navigate that thing, you put it into play. So I'm going to choose option one, which is to say, like, hey, let's take a break. And so I say that, and then when I put it in play, the thing escalates. So I step back again and go, okay, take ownership. That did not go well. My option I chose didn't work. I'm still an adult. Let's try option two maybe. And you work through those options as a responsible adult. So you're working on not engaging in that drama to try to pull them out of the drama.
And I think you guys would agree. One thing that Scripture talks about is Ephesians talks about that we are to live peaceably with one another as much as it is up to us. And so I think that's a really beautiful way of going, hey, like my job, if I see my spouse and someone else having a conflict, my job is not just to get in there and say, hey, you both need to cool down and be quiet. But my job is to help them work on that conflict, or kind of maybe even play a role of mediator. And so I think the next question is okay, so you're trying to live peaceably, and option A doesn't work, option B doesn't work, option C doesn't work, and now you're frustrated yourself or whatever may be happening. The question is, how do you exit conflict, or when do you exit conflict, or is it appropriate to exit conflict as it escalates to an unhealthy place?
Yeah. I think a way to set yourself up well for that is have that conversation with people, like we'll just go with spouse right now, to kind of talk about, if I get overwhelmed, I'm going to take a break, and that's going to look like me going for a drive, or that's going to look like me going to the other room, and set it up with your spouse. I need 20 minutes, and then let's check in and see if we're ready to do this, or whatever. When you're not in conflict, to set up some safety parameters for what you're going to do if it gets there can be one way to go about it. But if you're in a spot where you're feeling unsafe, either emotionally, especially if it's physically, if you're physically unsafe, get the heck out of Dodge. But if you're just feeling emotionally unsafe, whether your partner's actually attacking you or just your stuff is coming up so you're not feeling safe and you're not able to regulate, exit and take care of yourself. If you can say, I need to go take care of myself, do that first so your spouse knows that you're not leaving them. But if you can't, if you can't take care of yourself, y'all are never going to be able to come to a resolution. And so I have to do that a lot because the home that I grew up in, loud yelling was unsafe. And so if I'm in a place that's loud, or there's yelling that I don't expect, or my husband's voice goes up, I immediately go to that little kid place. And so I have to have a lot of awareness of, I am actually safe. I am an adult. Step out of the drama triangle, because it would be very easy for me to stay in that drama triangle when yelling is going on and either just exit because I don't want to deal with it. I want to go be safe. Or now that I'm an adult, yell back and fight back because I couldn't as a kid. And so it's just knowing what you need to be safe. And I think if safety means leaving, leave. If you're in a safe relationship that you want to grow, you have to come back to it when it's safe again.
I think with couples, when I'm working with couples, I like to call that a game plan. So we have a language for it before it gets there, because that helps actually de-escalate the conflict like even quicker, because you already have a game plan. We've talked about it. I'm not making you a bad person. You're not making me a bad person. So I like to call it the game plan. And then they have those familiar language things like, hey, let's take a break, or hey, whatever the words are that they came up with. So I think that's a good call. Yeah.
I would like to add on that if you, typically in relationship, especially in marriages, you have a tendency to be either anxious or avoidant in the relationship. And so the anxious attachment style is going to want to conflict more consistently, and the avoidant by nature is going to want to stay away from the conflict. And so if you know this about yourself, check in, because if you realize you're more anxious, you might not see the need to take a break as quickly. And if you're avoidant, you might take any excuse to take a break. And so like having that knowledge about self and that awareness, and again, checking in about like, okay, I tend to do this, so let me be aware of that. Where am I in this? I think also in this, a very, very helpful thing that is intimacy building is when there is conflict and there is the timeout, the break, the game plan is implemented, the buzzword is said, that the person who implemented the break is the one to re-engage in the conflict. It doesn't always have to happen that way, but it's trust building to say like, I need to go on that drive, I need to go take a breath, and I'm not leaving you, I'll be back. And then to show them, see, look, I am back now, and I am regulated. Again, it doesn't always have to be that way, but it does build a lot of trust to be able to be, if I say I need the break, I also need to be the one that says, all right, can we talk again?
And you can do that with your kids too. If you're in a fight with your kid, and kids push all the buttons all the time. And so if you need a break, tell your kid that. And so my kid's a toddler, and I've had to do that. Buddy, I'm about to say something or yell, and I need to take a break before we keep having this conversation. Mommy loves you, and she's coming back. And I have to leave the room for just a minute to be able to come back. And so he's gotten used to knowing, and he will say it now. And that's the other thing. When you do it with your kids and you don't put that pressure on yourself to like be the perfect parent and do it all right, your kid learns. So my kid has said, Mommy, I'm upset, I need a break. but I mean, he'll say it for anything, but like, that's how you teach them how to do conflict. You can do that at work. If you're getting in an argument with a coworker or your boss or whoever, you are allowed to ask for what you need. They don't have to give it to you, I guess, but you are allowed to ask for what you need and take it if it's a matter of safety, I think.
Yeah, I think it just reminded me of a practical example. One of the things that my wife will always say, especially when we're having a conflict, it's a weird way to say that, having a conflict. When we're yelling at each other, when we're mad, I'm the yeller. So I think a lot of this is identifying how you can fight. But one of the things that she says that's always really helpful to kind of calm me back down or bring me back down is, hey, we're on the same team. And so that's really helpful for me to go, oh, so I don't have to destroy you. Like, that's not my goal in this conversation. And so just finding, especially if you're married, finding some common language like they're talking about to go, hey, that's a safe phrase. That's something to bring your level back down and go, hey, I'm really not trying to argue with you to win this argument. I'm trying to argue with you, or I'm trying to conflict with you in a way that's healthy so that we can, how did you phrase that, Zach? You said it like 15, 20 minutes ago.
It's gone.
You said there was a really smart guy, and he was talking, oh my goodness. It was talking about co-creators.
Oh, yeah,
that
co-creation.
language.
Yeah, co-creation or collaboration. Yeah.
Right, to collaborate with each other. And so I'm going to start to use that phrase in my own mind. Like, hey, we're trying to build something here. And if I'm just going to act a fool, then we can't build something. All right, next question. Go ahead.
I think that there's that imagery in my mind. What I like to think about is sitting at a table, and you're at each of like the head of the table, and you're against each other. That's the fight that's happening. And if you could shift your chairs to the same side and look down at the problem at hand, like that's what's going on. Is that we have a problem, and when we're against each other, we face. But when we get shoulder to shoulder, we go, okay, let's figure out. Let's get creative together.
Let's take it another level deeper. This question says, how do you resolve conflict when a person doesn't desire to resolve that conflict with you? So kind of like that narcissist idea, but they're not a narcissist.
What was the? Can you go back to the scripture, the Ephesians about live peaceably?
As much as it is up to you, live peaceably with one another.
That I just like that one. Like, as much as it is up to you, like there is an understanding and awareness that God has that you cannot control people either. And so on some level, how do you resolve the conflict? You resolve as much as you can within you. You offer as much as you can, and then at some point, you have to let go of the things that are outside that circle that we said earlier.
There's multiple questions that deal with gaslighting. And so one question is, how do you handle conflict with someone who gaslights? Another one is, how do you resolve conflict when they choose to gaslight or are stonewalling? So I guess just talk about, one, defining gaslighting, and then two, how do you handle someone who is gaslighting you or you feel is gaslighting you?
So gaslighting is where somebody's going to try to take whatever just happened, whether it be your fault, their fault, whatever. It's always going to be your fault. That's a simple way of putting it, but it's also, I'm going to make you feel crazy for either saying that, thinking that, or feeling that way. Or, I've heard this a lot in my field. If something's going on that day, like, I wonder if something's wrong with that like, what is it about you that is, like, what, is something going on at home? Is that why you're dissatisfied with me, like, at work? So there's some gaslighting there, because it's always going to be somebody else's fault. You're always going to be, the other person's going to be the crazy one. That's gaslighting. What was the second question to that?
Just how do you handle someone who is doing that to you? Like, how do you resolve conflict with them, or how do you enter into a conflict with them? Help them identify or to explain how you feel when they are gaslighting you.
I think I don't know. I think when people use gaslighting to address conflict, or to just gaslighting as their norm, I do not think you can conflict resolve with that. There's a level of inability to see self. There's a level of inability to have open conversation, or to even entertain the idea that somebody else has an issue and it's with you and it's something that I did. So that's my thought on gaslighting. I've been around a lot of gaslighting, though, so I may be reactive in that question.
No, it's good. I feel like it might be useful to differentiate between that concept that we were talking about, narcissism, because narcissism and gaslighting go hand in hand in what we're describing. And so there's a level that is written about and talked about and about that is like, I would take it and put it over here and say exactly what Stephanie said is correct. Like if that narcissism, if that gaslighting to that level with the narcissism is there, there's an inability to see self, therefore they're never going to get into their responsible triangle to resolve this. I do want to also say that I feel like I've seen, I don't know, maybe we could call it a meta form of gaslighting, where we're saying people are gaslighting when they're not actually gaslighting, they're just trying to work it out within themselves, and so we're like gaslighting people to say they're gaslighting, and so so I just want you to be careful with some of these terms when they start getting thrown around. You start calling people narcissists or gaslight. It really is a very small percentage of the population, and that maybe what you're experiencing is the, I want to be careful with that, but self-correct me on this, okay? Or correct, whatever. But it is the potentially the crucible that you are in, the fire, the heat that you are in the crucible with, that has to burn out impurities within this conflict. And within that process, it gets uncomfortable enough that we're like, you obviously are gaslighting me and you're a narcissist, I'm getting out of here. And I don't know if that's always the case. I feel like I hear that a little bit too often.
I think gaslighting at its core is manipulation. A lot of people manipulate from a place of fear and a need for control because of that fear. And so there's a difference between a gaslighter narcissist and then somebody that may be using manipulative language and manipulative behavior out of their need to feel safe. And those are two different things. And so if you're in a relationship with somebody that has zero desire to learn how to feel safe on their own and move forward and learn empathy and learn that and learn how to feel safe in different ways, you're not going to be able to make much progress with them. If you're in a relationship with somebody that's a narcissist gaslighter, you're not going to be able to make progress with them. But if you're with somebody that is trying to work on it and is trying to understand why they do, and manipulation is just what they learned to survive, and they are willing to try to learn other ways to feel safe and survive, that's a different thing. And you can have a conversation with that. You can say, I mean, I don't think I would say you're gaslighting me right now, but I would say something like, I feel like my needs and my feelings right now are being dismissed. Is that what you're trying to do? Or something along those lines of like naming how you're feeling and see their reaction to it. And their reaction to it I just feel like there's a little bit of a difference between people that manipulate, which looks like gaslighting and is, if it's in the basic definition of it, because of fear and trauma. And then somebody that's doing it from a place of like, they don't really care and they're always going to be right.
Well, no, I like that because I think that if it is the fear that then leads to manipulation, then your approach, going back to the question, how do you deal with that? Then what I would do is you're going to have to shift your energy, shift your heart towards the person in a way that says like, and you don't like literally say this, but your energy shifts in a way that says, I see your fear and I'm going to be safe. Like, I am safe. I know I'm safe. I am responsible. I'm taking that ownership. I am good. I am here. I'm going to do everything I can to be safe, because if that's true, then as that person's fear reduces because of your safety, then their manipulation is not as important anymore. Therefore, this gaslighting is not as important.
I would also say that all the personality disorders utilize gaslighting. So I know we've not touched on the other ones, and I'm going to forget some of them, but there's histrionic, borderline, antisocial. They all use the gaslighting, and so I think that's really specific to say, because those personality disorders you're going to see a lot out there as well, not just narcissism. And they will feel like this person that I'm in a relationship with is always manipulating me. Why is that? Why am I always feeling manipulated, right? And so if it's like a lot, like a great deal, there's usually a personality disorder in there, which personality disorder comes from trauma. So it's not clear cut. Like, this person's personality disorder and they can no longer be anything else. That's not true either. So
I feel like a word that we probably should have said a really long time ago that we haven't yet is boundaries. boundaries are paramount and vital to healthy conflict and to feeling safe. And so what was rolling in my brain while you were talking, Zach, was kind of how we worked with the boys at Capstone, or how I think about children is like, I'm going to hold a boundary with the behavior, but I'm going to love and have compassion on what's behind the behavior. So if my kid's having a tantrum and he's kicking and throwing things, I'm obviously going to have a boundary with that behavior and make it stop. And maybe there's a consequence, maybe there's not. But then I'm going to come back and touch on whatever was behind that behavior. And so if you're in relationship with somebody that is trying to get better, you can hold a boundary in a moment if they're gaslighting you, or they're trying to manipulate you, or they're doing something that's not safe. But then if you know that it's about fear and a need for control because of safety, one, make sure that you're making it a safe space. But two, you can go back and love what's behind that behavior. Loving the person does not mean you put up with unhealthy behavior. It doesn't mean that you don't draw boundaries. You draw them. That's one of the best forms of love, actually, is holding boundaries with people. It means you care about them enough to hold them to what they're capable of.
And yourself.
And yourself. You're protecting yourself. But you can go behind it and tag back into, and that's where intimacy is built, and that's where resolution, I think, comes, is when you tag into what's behind their unhealthy behavior.
That's good. I have a friend that's a contractor here in town, and so he hears a lot of very unloving language a lot of times, and usually it's directed at him. And so one of the things he started to do is he'll actually say, hey, when you want to talk to me as an adult, then we can have this conversation. Now, you can imagine two contractors going back and forth. That usually only makes that person matter, but he'll actually come back and he'll follow up with that person a little bit later and say, hey, I know that we had this disagreement, or we were not meeting the same things, or this deadline wasn't met. And so it's actually built a lot deeper relationships with these guys. And so maybe you don't say, hey, when you want to talk to me like an adult, then we'll have this conversation. But you find a language or a way to go, hey, I'm noticing that I do not feel safe, and I need something to be able to tell someone, hey, we can circle back to this in just a little bit. And so I've loved that. And so I don't tell people that, but that's what I'm thinking in my head. Hey, we need to take a break and cool down, and then we'll come back to this. One of the next questions, it went all the way to the home screen. There we go. One of the next questions says, if two people close to you are codependent on each other, and you need to speak into that relationship as it is affecting your relationship, how do you do so? I'll read that again. If two people close to you are codependent on each other, and you need to speak into that relationship because it is affecting your relationship, I'm assuming with both of them, how do you do so?
I think that's dependent on the relationships. If it's a son and a mom, and it's a dad that's pointing out like the codependency within that relationship, I think that as a dad, that would start with the mom, and just you have that honest conversation of, hey, I'm noticing some unhealthy like relationships being created between the two of you guys, and this is where a dad's voice is so good to speak up into, because sometimes females don't know how that plays out with male children, because we're such caregivers and such, and sometimes that can become big codependency. But then the dad steps in and says that to the wife, like, hey, I want to just kind of like show you or talk to you about how that's going to be perceived, or how that's going to play itself out with a male. I think it's hard to answer that question without knowing like the scenario, but that's kind of an example.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to put that, which is I would encourage this person to go to the one that they have the most connection with, the most relationship with. And so in that scenario, it would be like the dad going to the mom. If it is two friends and then a third friend, which friend do you feel like you have this ability to be honest and vulnerable and intimate with, and then maybe approaching it with that, or but going, yeah. If it's adults, then that's where I go through. But if the kid is involved, then I would pull them down lower on the rung and go to the adult.
I would say I need an understanding of why it's affecting you so much, and maybe there's some boundaries that you need somewhere that you don't have yet, and maybe it's just a scenario of like calling out some unhealth that you see in a loving and challenging way. But generally, if we are that affected by somebody else's relationship, it's a missing boundary in general.
When an adult continues to act in childish ways, especially when it comes to conflict, what is the best way to respond?
As an adult, right? Don't join them in the childlike behavior. That would be my initial thought.
What was your circles that you had up there? What, there was this, I can't remember what they were called. They were labeled. Yeah.
Harsh setup and
So
soft setup.
a soft startup would be really good. Ask the question one more time because I lost my train of thought.
When an adult continues to act in childish ways, especially when it comes to conflict, what is the best way to respond?
Yeah, I think our initial response is why are you being such a baby, right? That's we can't say that because that's a persecutor.
That's being childlike.
Persecutor.
Yeah,
It's my persecutor, and I'm sure we sometimes can go there pretty quickly, but I think just a gentle response too, which is, hey, I'm wondering like what's going on for you like right now. A therapist would say, how old are you feeling right now, right? Because a lot of times that conflict comes from, if we're acting like children, oftentimes we are hitting an age of an event or experience of that specific age. So like I'm feeling 5 years old right now, and I'm feeling like I don't have any options, or I don't have any verbal access to talk through this conversation. So that's how a therapist, which if you are using really healthy like languaging and you've been in therapy with your spouse, you can ask that. You can say, okay, please, I love you. How old are you feeling right now? Because I'm noticing that this is a response that's not you. So it's very soft startup.
I think now that I've said the word, I'm going to keep saying it, boundaries. If you are with somebody that's continuing to act childish, not in the moment where they're in the childish behavior, but at a different moment, be able to tag back into it and go, hey, when you do this, when you throw something, when you, whatever the behavior is that's childish, I'm not going to engage with you at that moment because either I don't feel safe or it's not productive or I don't accept that behavior anymore. So if that happens, I'm just going to walk away. And I'll come back 30 minutes later and see where you're at. And so I think setting up boundaries on the front end with that childish behavior. But then if you set up the boundary, you have to hold it. That's the hardest part, right? So like hold the boundary. That means you have to remove yourself if you say that's what you're going to do. That's the only, boundaries are about narrowing somebody's options in their behavior towards you. And so if you're narrowing those options of if you want to do this with me, you're going to have to talk to me differently. You can't yell at me. You can't throw things anymore. I don't feel safe. And if you throw something, I'm out and I'll be back later. Setting up some of those on the front end so that they experience that the behavior is not okay from you.
I think sometimes that can trigger somebody too to get really ramped up with that because I'm feeling 5 and now you're abandoning me in this conflict, whatever this is. And so I think if you know that person well enough and you know that's going to trigger them, I think boundaries is exactly what you have to do, but you have to even say it almost covertly and say, hey, I need a minute. Like put it on yourself. I need a minute. Knowing them well enough to know they're going to calm down, right? Get back into their, their cortex, their frontal cortex, and be able to have a normal conversation with you. I think that's important.
I want to throw on with boundaries real quick too, that a thing that I find important to remind ourselves is boundaries have little to do with other people and everything to do with yourself. And if you can keep that focus, it helps you to understand what your boundaries are. Because if we are focused on other people's behaviors and what they can and can't do, we've gotten outside of our circle. But if we talk about ourselves, like for example, I am not going to allow myself to be around somebody who throws things. That's a me statement. That's about me. I'm not going to allow myself to be around somebody who yells or who whatever. And so at that point, now their behavior does influence your decision, but your decision is based on you. Where I wouldn't want you to go is into boundaries are about you can't do this because then you're playing into the child again. Like they're a child, you're treating them like a child, you're parenting them like a child, which then something you were saying earlier, Stephanie, about like then what you're doing is reinforcing you can't do this. Like I'll take care of it for you. I'll be the parent for you. I will be the bigger person. And you're not empowering them on some level to say, like, I invite you into an adult stance. And then when you're ready, I'll be here. But until you're there, I'm going to be standing over here.
How do you resolve past conflict with someone who is in refusal to engage in resolution?
I think you resolve it with yourself, within yourself, and understand that you've done the best that you possibly could and that you are making efforts. You can always leave the door open for that conflict to be resolved if they ever are ready to step back into that with you. But just knowing that you've done your best and you're always open for that is going to be I think the only thing you can do with somebody who is unwilling to resolve any conflict.
I think that second part of that is the hardest part of that. Like the first part is very hard about like resolving it within you and taking it to the Lord and like having that process of handing him and saying, this is not mine, I'm not going to carry this anymore. And doing that is a very hard process. But I think one of the hardest is the second part of that, which is keeping yourself in a ready position for God's redemptive power. Because like, I think at times we want to just like, you know what, forget you, I'm just going to let go and move on. And then we're not waiting for the option. We're not giving God the option to work on their heart in a way that has them come back and you're ready. You're sitting there ready. Like I don't know, I think of the prodigal son and the father and that thing. Like he kept his heart ready for his son to come back, where he could have just been like, nah, you're going to have to say I'm sorry 5 times before we get. He had himself prepped and ready for when that return happened.
I think it also has to come from a peaceful place of rest. Like I'm resting in this. If they do come back, okay, great, we can resolve this. Instead of like, if it's a girlfriend or a boyfriend trying to wait on that other, person to finally come back, that doesn't seem like a very restful place to be, or a spouse, right? Because you're always, maybe even you're checking your Facebook to see, or their Facebook or their Instagram to see, are they ready yet, right? That's just an example. So I think that's what is important, is to find peace and rest there with that open door if they're ready to come back, not an anxious place of waiting.
Yeah, I saw a quote the other day that said, one of the hardest things to do is to accept the apology that you never got. And that is about that internal peace. And that is about, I think a lot of times we need the apology, or we need the conversation to feel valid in the way that we felt in it, to feel valid in our hurt. And so to be able to internally go, that was hurtful and it was valid whether they ever admit it or not, is that really hard process that Zach was talking about. But to know that your experience was your experience regardless, if you ever get an apology for it, leads you to that place of peace. And really, we all know in this room, that part comes from God, I think. But the cool thing is, if you do that and then 20 years down the road, the apology is extended, you're ready to accept it because you already did the internal work. Forgiveness is not about the other person, it's about you, and getting your peace back.
That's good. How do I help a conflict if I'm in the middle? So if somebody's playing the mediator, I guess. How do you help a conflict?
How do you help conflict if you're the mediator? Like you're like in a peacemaker way, or like in a...
You can assume whichever way.
Yeah, because I would say if you're in the rescuer, like if you notice you're in the rescuer role, then we know what to do with that one, right? We have to identify that role that you're playing and identify your responsible stance. So I think that if that's the case, that's where you're going to have to step out. You're going to get stuck in the drama triangle if you are trying to rescue a conflict. I don't know if you guys want to go further on what if you're actually like in a responsible stance trying to mediate a conflict.
You can go there.
Go ahead.
Oh, you want me to go there?
Yeah.
You continued using the language that we're using today. Continually checking in with self to make sure, like that metaphor used earlier, that your kayak is centered and you are balanced, that you are in your responsible stance, that I'm a grown adult, I'm not a child, I don't have to operate that way, I don't have to. Continuing to reaffirm these statements as you stand in the presence of this. And I guess where I go to in my mind in that one is, all the time in my office. There's conflict happening. And when the conflict is happening, my job is I'm consistently having to remind myself of that I'm in this position. Do not engage in the drama triangle. I do not need to rescue anybody. Nobody here is really the victim. I want to encourage empowerment here. And so that to do that, I have to make sure I'm balanced, I'm centered, and I'm in my place of peace and presence.
Being okay with tension. You yourself being able to be uncomfortable with the tension and knowing that it's not bad. Asking good questions, like Stephanie's example of like, how old are you feeling, or like, what are you feeling right now? And helping people get from like the content of a fight to the actual process of the fight. So the content is the details. Well, then he said this, and then she slammed the door and threw the blue plate or whatever. And the process underneath being, she felt scared, and then he felt ashamed because he made her feel scared, or and moving into that deeper part. And so if you are actually in that responsible mediator role, like maybe it's two siblings, maybe you're the parent and you're helping two siblings figure it out, asking some of those good questions so that they can go from the content and the details, which most people get lost in the fight, and down to that deeper processing level of what's really going on.
How can you have a healthy conflict with someone who is in a victim, persecutor, rescuer stance?
It's coming out of that triangle and coming into the healthy triangle. And you gotta pull yourself into one, or I like this, and I had to draw it out for myself here because I don't use that one, but finding yourself as a creator, a coach, or a challenger. Right, pulling yourself out of the drama because you're not gonna resolve it at all. And so a lot of that has to do with, okay, it's like intentional, like kind of what they just said, which is, okay, I am calm, I am here, I am breathing, and then, what are my options? Pulling, like just not engaging in that.
I think shifting your expectation of the outcome to be resolution, because you're not going to come to a resolution with somebody that won't get out of the triangle. Oh, yeah. And shifting your expectation for success or whatever, doing conflict healthy, of you maintaining your own regulation and responsibility outside of the triangle, because you won't come to resolution. So if that's your goal, it's not going to happen with somebody that won't get out of the triangle. Your goal may just be to like maintain that healthy boundary.
Last question. We made it through all of them. What if setting a boundary causes them to escalate to verbal/emotional abuse? You guys have kind of touched on it, but just any final thoughts on that?
Leave for the moment. It might. If you're drawing a boundary with somebody, especially if you're drawing a hard boundary with somebody that's in addiction, or somebody that's in a trauma cycle, or somebody that's personality disorder, something like that, it could cause a reaction. And so I would say if you're in a relationship with somebody that could be a potential. You're asking that question for a reason. If that's a potential in your relationship, have your game plan. I'm going to draw this hard boundary, and if it escalates, already know what you're going to do before you draw the boundary. And so that may be having your shoes on when you draw the boundary so you can leave outside if you need to. That may be having your car keys in your pocket. That may be drawing the boundary in a public place initially. That may be drawing the boundary with a safe third party, be that a therapist or a pastor or whoever that can hold a buffer space for you. I would say have your plan of what you need to be safe if it escalates. If it's emotional, you can draw some other boundaries. If it gets physical, you got to get out to protect yourself. You can come back later if it's somebody that you believe can make movement with you, but that is part of the vulnerability and the risk of starting to do conflict differently, is it really disrupts people's systems and they can have a really harsh response. It's usually out of fear and lack of control. And so you can usually find movement in it eventually, unless it's addiction, personality disorder kind of stuff, and then that's just hard.
We used to tell the moms specifically at Capstone, because they were always usually the one that was in conflict with the sons that are in the addiction, like, be ready to go, like, I need to go take a bathroom break, give me just a minute, or I need to go get groceries, can you give me just a minute? Like, finding some other out right? To exit. It doesn't always have to be like, I'm leaving you right now because this is crazy, but just a general, like, non-conflict, like, thing I'm going to go do, right? The second thing is, when I'm teaching boundaries a lot with people who haven't really figured out how to do that yet, or it's new to them, a lot of the times I notice this, they want to announce, I'm about to set a boundary, right? That's usually like escalates the conflict. So I would say you don't have to announce that you're setting a boundary. Just set a boundary within, like, know what your boundary is and how to do that. Don't announce it, right? Because that usually makes people mad. Oh, they've been to therapy, they're setting a boundary. Right, that's usually what happens. So it causes more conflict. So,
Oh, your counselor told you to do that.
yeah, you've been to therapy too much.
I think that not all boundaries have to be stated either. It's not a requirement. Boundaries are like I said, they're within you. They're something that you are doing to honor and respect your God-given value and worth. And so I think in relationship, when it's healthy and safe, you share these things, but you don't even have to state them. You can just operate out of your boundaries. I'm thinking about that question about what do I do when somebody is escalating into these ways. I'm like, yeah, it's gonna happen. Like if you have been in a relationship that is in the drama triangle, and you change that, it will escalate to whatever degree it needs to invite you back in. I mean, I have seen some insane levels of escalation to pull people back in, and it's just like, I got caught again, and it's just almost comical. Like I couldn't even see it coming, and they got me back into this thing. There's a quote that I heard that is, birds born in a cage think that freedom is a crime. And if you have this, if you were raised and steeped in this idea of the way that we love each other is through this drama triangle. Like if I really care, then I rescue, and if we think it's real love, if that's the case, then anything against that, which would be the responsible triangle, looks like you don't love anymore because it's the opposite of what you've been born into. And so I just be ready for that. And honestly, I don't think this has to be language necessarily, but it's good for me to be reminded. There's some degree that, like, if I'm in a relationship with someone who we've done this our entire life and I change, I have some level of empathy and sorrow for this person, towards this person. Like, I'm so sorry. I promised you that I would fight you the rest of our days, and that's how we would love each other, and I'm doing it different, and I'm sorry. I kind of lied to you a little bit. But now I'm going to do something healthier, and in that healthier space, hopefully invite us into a healthier space too. But there's some empathy, I think, on a level of like, yeah, sorry, I agreed. We were going to be codependent until we died. And it's like, well, now I'm changing that on you.
I think I think if you know this partner or person is constantly escalating with you, or in response to something, if there's a consistent level of that, you need extra help outside of yourself to help with this relationship, whether it's a friend relationship or it's a partner or it's a kid, right? So that's where you step out and you seek a therapist, or you seek a, like somebody from the church, something outside of yourself, because that's consistent escalation is not where we should be living, right? It's not healthy for them. It's not healthy for us, and actually tends to start wearing your nervous system down if you're the receiving person on that other end.
I just wanted to tag back into what Zach said about the rescuer. I think especially in the Bible Belt church place that we're at, rescuing is often called love. So when you stop rescuing and you hold boundaries, the person that you usually rescue is going to feel like you don't love them. That doesn't mean that that's the truth, but that is the way that they feel. And so you've got to have compassion for that. And we went round and round, and it was usually moms at Capstone. Hey, your son got caught using again, and he's in jail. No, don't bail him out. Leave him there. And the mom will go, what? I can't leave my kid in jail? What if he gets beat up? What if he does whatever? Let him. Because if he suffers the consequence now and he starts to learn, he can miss out on some potentially extremely heavier consequences later. But it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel like love. It doesn't feel like love to do it. It doesn't feel like love to being on the receiving end of it. But it is. And so part in our culture, I think a lot of times rescue has equaled love. I'm going to take away this bad feeling that you have. And to leave someone in the bad feeling is not loving them. That's how it feels. That's not true. And so we have to work on that definition and maybe even have overt conversations about that of like, this isn't going to feel loving. You're going to feel like I'm abandoning you. It's okay to feel that way. And this is the way that I love you best. I am doing this because I want better for both of us, or whatever that conversation needs to be. But it's real for them that it doesn't feel like you love them anymore. And in some way, you have to honor that piece of it. And you have to honor the piece in you that when you first start doing it, you're not going to feel like a loving person. But you're loving yourself better by holding those boundaries. And it's the only shot they have at changing their behavior.
That's really good. Any other resources that you guys just have off the top of your head? Books, CDs, DVDs? I'm just kidding. Nobody has CDs or DVDs anymore.
Cassettes, 8-tracks.
Yeah.
One researcher we did not hit on, who he is like a guru on this, is John Gottman in the Gottman Institute. So, I mean, you could go to his website and get lost for days in there on conflict resolution and these type of things. So, and he does a really good job of bringing the research aspect in, and he does a really good job, I think, of like making things practical and making it like here's step 1, step 2 kind of stuff. He has a quote. It's his research. After he did his research watching couples fight, he said, and he proved it, that with 80% accuracy, he could predict divorce rates based on watching one fight from a couple. So he could see how they conflicted, and by an 80% success rate to predict their divorce, if they were going to divorce or not. Because the way that they approach that is how they're going to approach all forms of intimacy. And so I think he's a real good resource.
And he broke that down, I can't remember to how many numbers, but 8 to 11 like descriptors of what he saw in that argument. So it's really cool because you can go and go, okay, do I do this? And then go to the opposite, because he has the opposite too. If the couple is doing this, then I can predict that they're going to be long-term, stay together. And what does that look like? And then you can assess yourself. Am I really good at that?
Well, the thing that she said that's so important right there is assess yourself. Mm-hmm. You're not going to get on Gottman's website and assess your spouse or whoever you're fighting with. Assess yourself and that stuff.
I always go back to Brene Brown. She's got a book that I can't remember the title of right now because my brain's squishy, but it is about conflict. It is about not being afraid of the battle. I forget her word for it. It's not battle. It's afraid of the rumble. She calls it a rumble. I don't know if it's not daring greatly. It's not braving the wilderness. It's one of the other ones. But all of her stuff is about knowing your own stuff and knowing how you're feeling and being okay with vulnerability and okay with tension. And the book that we named one of these times, How to Raise a Secure Child, while that's technically focused on parenting, the whole book is about knowing your own stuff so that you can create a safe and secure environment. And then I recommend this book a lot, Sacred Marriage. And I'm only mentioning that one because all of those books, actually, Sacred Parenting, it goes back to the deeper purpose of relationship, which is about that experience of heaven and pointing back to the holiness of relationship and how marriage is about being holy, not about being happy. And so those books, I don't agree with all that's in them, but I agree with the overall premise of when we remember that relationship is supposed to be a glimpse of heaven and an earthly experience of what we are supposed to experience with God, it changes the way we look at it and maybe the way that we behave. And those books do a good job of pointing back to that, I think. So that's what popped into my brain.
And you can Google or YouTube Cartman's Triangle. There's lots of YouTube videos on there if you're like, I want to see more about this information.
And the Blame video.
And the Blame video.
I think the book that just popped into my head that is I've completely forgot about, but if you want a whole nother resource, that what it is called The Anatomy of Peace. It's a good one. It's a good one, right? The Arbiter Institute, that's the author. It's a group of guys who wrote this, and I'm not even going to tell you what it's about. It's just good. The Anatomy of Peace. I want you to have your own experience.
I think everybody should read that book. It is excellent.
Amen.
That's awesome. Well, as you guys can tell, these three know a lot about people. They know a lot about themselves. I think that's one thing that's impressive about me is they've done their own work. And so I think about Psalm 139, which we know the front end of that. You've created me in my mother's womb, but we often forget about the back end of that verse or that that psalm where he says, try me and know my anxious thoughts, O Lord. And so it really is about what's inside of me, what's inside of my heart, what's inside of my mind. Why am I a part of this conflict, or how can I be a part of the solution to this conflict? One thing, if you want really kind of an exhaustive guide to conflict, there is a church out of Dallas. You mentioned Reengage, that has started Reengage, which is a marriage ministry that we do here at the church. But the church is Watermark Community Church, and they have a thing that's a real simple title. It says Conflict Field Guide. And so it's got a lot of really good information on how to enter into conflict, and then also a biblical backing for entering into conflict and dealing with unreasonable people and all of the things that we've talked about this evening. So would you all mind, this may feel a little weird, but would you just clap for them? Maybe that's going to feel weird for them. This was Christina's kind of child, baby, however you want to say it. And she brought it to the church about a year ago, probably, and said, hey, here's how I'm feeling, and I'm exhausted, and I don't know how to care for all these people, and my waiting list for my practice is 1,000 people long, and I'm not sure how to get there, and so how do we get this information into people's hands? And so I am super thankful to her for kind of being the genesis for this idea, and then I'm thankful for Stephanie and Zach as well to be here. They've been here the last 3 nights for 2 hours talking about these things after an already long day. And so I'm just super thankful for you guys. I'm also the crier probably out of this group, so if I keep talking, I'll start crying. So we'll save myself the embarrassment, and not embarrassment, it's good to feel your feelings, right? There we go. Okay. We'll pray, and then if you have questions for these 3, they would love to spend maybe 3.5 minutes more of their time answering those questions. I'm kidding, but maybe serious. Father, thank you for this evening. Thank you for the opportunity to come and to talk about conflict. Father, we're going to experience it. It's going to be a necessary part of our life, and so I just thank you for healthy and helpful ways to deal with it, ways to think about it. But Father, would you help us just to do our own work of identifying within ourselves what it is that you have for us? Father, would you identify those anxious thoughts? Would you identify those worries, those fears that are coming up that are maybe causing us to act in a certain way or respond in a certain way to our spouse or a friend or a coworker, whatever it may be, Father, so that we can actually do what you've called us to do, which is as much as it is up to us to live peaceably with one another, to overlook the small offenses, and to honor each other enough to have conflict in a healthy way, and to desire to repair and restore relationships, Father. And so we just thank you for that. We thank you for the forgiveness that you've given us. We just celebrated Easter last week, and so we thank you for your Son's death on the cross, which offers us full forgiveness. Father, that you don't forgive and forget us, but Father, that you desire to have a relationship with us. And so would you just help us to dive deep into that, to know you, to know ourselves, and then just to help other people know you and know themselves. Father, we love you, and we thank you for this time. In your name we pray. Amen.
My failures and flaws, Lord, you've seen them all, and you still call me friend. 'Cause the God of the mountain is the God of the valley. There's not a place your mercy your grace. God, I need it every day. It's the only thing that ever really makes me want to change. Yeah, I don't want to abuse your grace. God, I need it every day. It's the only thing that ever really makes me want to change. Yeah, I don't want to abuse your grace. God, I need it every day. It's the looks to me like weakness is a canvas for your strength. And my story isn't over, my story's just begun. And failure won't define me, 'cause that's what my Father does. Yeah, failure won't define me,